All right. So, I'm a little bit late for this video, but I guess it's before the NFL season, so I guess it was timely enough. So today we are going to be doing our NFL 2021-2022 season predictions. Um, so a couple things I want to point out. I've done things a little bit differently compared to what I've done last year. So, number one, I actually broke it down like game for game. So, there are some records that I feel like might be a little bit off here, but I predicted it based on schedule. Um, so, maybe it will be right, maybe it won't. I'm not sure. Um, so, over here, I also put in the corner where I think they will be playoff wise. So, like, if they have a Z in the corner, it's going to be the first seed. If they have a Y in the corner, that means they won the division. If it's an X in the corner, they made the playoffs, but they did not win their division. So, it's just a wild card berth. And then the E means that they did not make the playoffs. So, let's go. Starting off with the AFC East, and we have the Buffalo Bills. So, yes, I think. I don't know why that logo over here is so blurry, but that's fine, I guess. So I have the Bills going 14-3, which is half a game better than they were last year. Oh, one more thing to point out, as you know, it's every NFL team now plays 17 games, not 16. So the records are going to look a little bit different. So you're always going to see someone either getting worse or getting better. So that's why no matter what, you either have to improve or do worse than you did last season. And I have the Bills doing half a game better, going 14-3. I still just don't see them getting the number one seed. They've improved a little bit, but I just don't know. I still think they're the second best team in the AFC. Still a really good team, and I think they can actually make the Super Bowl this year. Okay, next up is the Miami Dolphins. So they do make the playoffs this year. Last year, they were eliminated in Week 17 from playoff contention in pretty surprising fashion, at least in my opinion. I think they do half a game better than they did last season and go 11-6. And they get the sixth seed, which means they make the playoffs. They've improved a little bit over the offseason, but they've also released a lot of the players that they've signed last year. So that's why I only see them doing half a game better than they did, but still improvement and most importantly, making the playoffs. Okay, so next we have my team, the Patriots. So the Patriots, I believe, just by a hair, they will miss the playoffs. However, they will have the biggest improvement out of everybody in the AFC East, doing 1.5 games better than they did last season. With a 9-8 record, they've signed a ton of people in the offseason, but just I don't know, something is telling me that they just aren't gonna have enough to make it. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Okay, so next, finally in the AFC East, we have the New York Jets. So the Jets, I just still don't see how they're going to be good. I just don't. I'm not feeling Zach Wilson. I don't. I think he'll be good, but he has the chance of being just Sam Darnold 2.0. And I mean, I think Sam Darnold is an okay quarterback. It's just that they didn't develop him correctly. Hopefully, this time they'll develop Zach Wilson better. And then he can be a good quarterback. But for now, this season, I think there's going to be even more growing pains. And they're going to go 3-14, half a game better than they did last season, but still nowhere close to playoff contention. Okay, so the Cleveland Browns. So the Browns So I have the Browns doing a lot better than they did last season. I think they get the third seed in a tiebreaker with the Buffalo Bills. They will not get the second seed. They'll get the third seed though. Win the division, which is I think it's a pretty decent step forward. 14-3 record. That's 2.5 games better than they did last season. This Browns team is very good. They've improved a little bit. They haven't really done much, but I mean their team's already really good, so I don't really think they needed to have a flashy free agency to be good. So I have the Browns going 14-3 and winning the division just slightly over this team, the Baltimore Ravens. So the Ravens, I have improving by a game and a half. I have them going and getting the fifth seed, barely losing out on the division. I think it's going to be a dead heat for the division win between the Browns and the Ravens this year. They have a really good team once again, but just their wide receivers are a little bit of a question, I think. They don't necessarily have the best wide receiving core, which I think will give the Browns the edge over the Ravens, but still 13-4. The fifth seed, I mean, the last Super Bowl champion was from the fifth seed. So I still think the Ravens will have a very good chance at possibly winning it all. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why I am almost kind of regretting picking it based on their actual schedule strength, because I feel like the Steelers' prediction is a little bit low, but I guess apparently they're going to go 7-10. That's 5.5 games worse than they did last season. Now, obviously, they were the worst. What were they, 11-0 at one point? They were the worst undefeated team ever. That team really was not as good as that run showed. So they're going to get eliminated, and once again, I really don't agree with this. I'd say they'd be either 8-9 or 9-8, but apparently, according to their schedule, I think they're going to go 7-10. Okay, and finally, the last team in the AFC North is the Cincinnati Bengals. So this is one of only two teams to have not one whole number as their decrease or increase, because they had a tie and now the extra game just messes the whole thing up. So I have the Bengals obviously not making the playoffs, and I have them going 4-13, which is one full game worse than they did last season. Now, this is another one that I don't necessarily think will actually happen. I think they'll improve a little bit, but once again, based on their schedule, I have them going 4-13, and the reason is simple. Joe Burrow literally does not have an O-line. He's got a good wide receiver, but he doesn't have a O-line. How is Joe Burrow going to throw to his great wide receiver if the wide receiver doesn't even have a chance to get any breathing room before Joe Burrow has to throw, because he already has 5 D linemen in his face? Joe Burrow is going to struggle again this year. Joe Burrow didn't really struggle, but he just got sacked a lot. And I think that's going to be a trend this season. Now, maybe Joe Burrow can just bomb the ball downfield and hope that somebody catches it, but I don't know. Okay, so AFC South, we got the Tennessee Titans, who I believe will win the division. They will get the 4th seed, just like they did last season. And I believe they will do half a game better than they did last season, and that half a game, I believe, is the addition of Julio Jones, because that's now their wide receiver. They have tons of weapons now. They have Jones, they have Brown, and they have Derrick Henry, of course, which is like the best running back in the league. So I believe for that they'll go 12-5. I still don't think they're going to be on like the level of the Chiefs or the Bills or the Browns, but they'll be there. Okay, so the Indianapolis Colts, I believe they will barely get into the playoffs. They'll do half a game worse than they did last season at 11-6, but they will still make the playoffs with the 7th seed. The only reason why I have them doing half a game worse than they did last season is just because I feel like Carson Wentz is a downgrade over Phillip Rivers. But maybe now that Carson Wentz is kind of has a better system around him, maybe this time he'll do good. I still think they'll get a playoff berth, but just I'm not sure if they're gonna do much with it. Okay, so the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I have them going 4-13, 2.5 games better than they did last season. Although that's not really saying much considering they went 1-15 last year. I think this is going to be just going to slowly climb up the ranks and eventually morph into a good team. But for now, I have them going 4-13, which I guess technically is not too bad for a team that just had the number 1 overall pick. But still not great. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be slightly more successful than Zach Wilson in his first season, just because I feel like the people around him are a lot better on the Jaguars than they are on the Jets. I still think the Jaguars were a better team than the Jets were last season. The Jets just didn't know how to tank. So I have the Jaguars going 4-13. And finally, your number 1 overall pick, the Houston Texans. So obviously Deshaun Watson is not going to play there anymore. We pretty much know that guaranteed. So I have them getting eliminated, and I have them getting the number 1 overall pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. And I have them going 1-16, 3.5 games worse. Imagine having a 4-12 record and still doing 3.5 games worse than said 4-12 record. Like, that is sad. So that's kind of how I have Houston's season playing out. They're just, I don't know. Without Deshaun Watson, I feel like they're not good. Deshaun Watson was like the only bright spot on that team, or at least on the offense. Without Watson, without J.J. Watt, your biggest piece on offense and your biggest piece on defense are both gone. So, well, technically Deshaun Watson's still on the team, but we all know he's not going to be. Otherwise, he's just not going to play. So yeah, 1-16, first overall pick. Last division in the AFC, the Kansas City Chiefs. I have them going 16-1, 1.5 games better than they did last season. They somehow improved in the offseason. So I have them getting the number 1 seed. Not much to talk about here. Chiefs are still probably the best team in the AFC. Bills, you tried, but I just still have the Chiefs being better. Okay, this is another one that I do not agree with. And if I did not do it broken down game by game, it would not be the same. I do not agree with this prediction. So apparently, according to me, the Chargers are going to go 11-6, 3.5 games better than they did last season. I don't know about that, but I guess I did predict that. Barely missing out on the playoffs with the tiebreaker, but the Colts 11. I still feel like that's too much, but they do have a really good quarterback in Justin Herbert. They had a late season resurgence, the Chargers. So 3.5 games. I'm not sure if 11-6 is realistic. but I do see massive improvement over last season, though. Okay, we have the Denver Broncos. I think they will do about 1.5 games better than they did last season at 7-10. The Broncos really are not a bad team necessarily. They're just okay. So I feel like 7-10 is very realistic for them. Okay, final team is the Las Vegas Raiders, and the only reason I have them going 4-13, which is 4.5 games worse than they did last year, the only reason why I have them going that bad isn't necessarily because they are a bad team, but more because everybody around them has gotten better. The Raiders just have not done much. I still do not like that Raiders team. There's nothing too flashy about it. It's just kind of there. So I think they go 4-13. Okay, let's move on to the NFC. NFC East first. The Washington football team. Now, I think the Washington football team actually have a good chance of being a contender next year. I have them getting the 4th seed for the second year in a row, winning their division. But this time I have them going 11-6, which is 3.5 games better than they did last season. So I think because they have a lot of actually really good players. They might be one of the most underrated teams in the league, right there with the Dolphins. So 11-6 for the Washington football team. Then we have the New York Giants. This is another one that I don't think I would have done if I didn't break down the whole schedule. The Giants, I have them going 10-7, 3.5 games better than last year. Once again, just a game short, but still big improvement. However, I have them barely missing the playoffs. I mean, I guess they did get Kenny Golladay, which is a big help for Daniel Jones. But I don't know if I agree with that necessarily, but I think the Giants will improve a lot over last year. The Dallas Cowboys, I have them going 4-13, 2.5 games worse than they did last year. Missing the playoffs. Yeah, not much to say here. The Cowboys just are not good. They need a full rebuild. I'm not even really sure what they're trying to do. They don't have a rebuild going on, but they're also not contending. So I'm not really sure what's going on in Dallas, but it's going to show here by them going 4-13. Finally, we have the second overall pick in the NFL draft for 2022, I believe, is the Philadelphia Eagles. So I have them going 2-15, which is 3 games worse than they did last year because of the tie. It kind of just offsets to 3 games. Yeah, the Eagles aren't great. It's a pretty big mess down there. I'm not sure why they fired their coach. I guess maybe because their coach didn't want to rebuild and they wanted to rebuild, so they just kind of mutually agreed to part ways. But their team just really is not good. I think Jalen Hurts is not horrible, but I don't think he's a starting caliber QB. Or maybe starting caliber, but nowhere near like Patrick Mahomes or anyone like that. So I have them going 2-15, and getting the second overall pick in the draft. Now we have the Green Bay Packers. Now, I made this prediction assuming that Aaron Rodgers plays for the Packers. They go 11-6, which is 2.5 games worse than last season. They get the 3rd seed by winning their division, which I believe is going to be probably the easiest division in football next season. But yeah, I have them getting the third seed, 11-6, assuming Aaron Rodgers plays there. Of course, that's still a big if, and I don't think anybody really knows except for Aaron Rodgers and maybe the Green Bay Packers. Um, so yeah, I have them. I think even if Aaron Rodgers does play, I still think they're gonna have some struggles. Just simply because I'm not really sure how good that team actually is. Uh, but I still have them getting a pretty good seed and possibly making it to the second or even the third round. Okay, so this is why I say it's the easiest division in football. Second place goes 5-12, 2.5 games worse than they did last season. They get eliminated. It's the Minnesota Vikings. So the Vikings have lost a lot of players over the past couple of seasons. And I think it's really going to show that they need to be in full rebuild mode because the Vikings are not great. So last season they struggled a lot later in the season, and I think that's going to carry over to 2021. And they're going to go 5-12, 2.5 games worse. Okay, the Chicago Bears. Now, this is the big question is it going to be Andy Dalton or Justin Fields? According to their coach and their GM, it's going to be Andy Dalton as the starting quarterback. Justin Fields, I think, is a good quarterback, but with Andy Dalton starting for the team, I'm just not really sure if they're even going to be good. The people around him are not great either. You have a defense which has really just kind of been torn apart when it didn't need to. The defense 2 years ago, even a year ago, last year, was very good. And they just needed to build around the offense. They just needed to build up the offense to match with that good defense. But instead, they tore apart the defense and are going with a full rebuild. I'm just not sure how much I agree with that move. And now I think it's really going to show why they shouldn't have torn apart that defense so much. So I have them going 4-13, 4.5 games worse. And finally, the worst team in the NFC North, the Detroit Lions. 3-14 record, 2.5 games worse than they did last season. They downgraded by getting Jared Goff and parting ways with Matthew Stafford. Not really much to say here. It's just they lost Kenny Golladay. They have a worse quarterback. It's just, once again, it's going to be another struggle-filled season for the Detroit Lions. Okay, 2 divisions left. NFC South, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, defending Super Bowl champion. I believe they get the second seed at a 12-5 record, which is actually only a half a game better than they did last season. But if we learned anything from last year, the regular season does not matter for the Buccaneers. So I have them doing half a game better. They brought literally everybody back, so there's really they didn't get or lose anybody in free agency, so there's not really much to talk about here. But yeah, the Buccaneers are still going to be a good team, but I have them going 12-5 just simply because their schedule, they have a couple teams that I know for a fact can beat them. Okay, so this one might be a bit of a surprise. I have the New Orleans Saints making the playoffs, getting the 7th seed, and they're going to go 11-6, which is 1.5 games worse than they did last season. Yeah, I actually don't have them doing as bad as a lot of other people have said they will. They're obviously going to do worse, but they are not going to be as bad as many people think they are. Obviously, they lost Drew Brees to retirement, so that's a massive L. but I still think they'll be decent. Carolina Panthers. So they're not going to make the playoffs. They're going to go 4-13, which is 1.5 games worse than they did last season. Um, Teddy Bridgewater compared to Sam Darnold. I mean, it's tough. It's a tough comparison to make. I'm not sure who's better. I don't think necessarily either of them are. We're going to be the future of the Panthers. I think unless Sam Darnold really develops well, I don't think he's going to be the future of the Panthers. Just like Teddy Bridgewater certainly was not the future of the Panthers. So I have them going 4-13, which is not great. Definitely not great. Okay, so next up we have the Atlanta Falcons. Worst team in the NFC South. I have them going 2-15, third overall pick in the NFL draft. So not really much to say here. They've lost Julio Jones. This team has just been pretty much been taken apart over the last couple of years, and this is going to be their worst season yet, going 2-15. The Falcons are not a very good team. They were a couple of years ago, but not now. And I think it's really going to show. Not really much to say other than that. 2-15 for the Atlanta Falcons. Final division in the NFL. Once again, another one that I don't necessarily agree with. 4-13 for the Seattle Seahawks, a game and a half better than they did last season, and they're going to get the first seed. The Seahawks, I just don't really agree with my prediction here, because I don't really think they've improved in many categories here. Russell Wilson might be unhappy, which honestly, based on what we've seen from Aaron Rodgers last season, might actually be a good thing. So Seahawks go 14-3. Okay. So the LA Rams, they get the 5th seed and they make the playoffs. They go 12-5, game and a half better than they did last season. Last season they had the 6th seed. This season they get 1 seed better. Still a pretty good team, and I think that difference is going to be the fact that they have Matthew Stafford and not Jared Goff. So I think that's going to be the big sign of improvement. The Arizona Cardinals. So the Cardinals have gotten some. They've had an interesting free agency. They've signed a bunch of old guys, but the thing is, they're decent old guys who can still play. And I think the Cardinals already were a pretty good team last season. The end of the season was a little bit disappointing for them, but the start was pretty good. So if they can play the whole season like they did at the start of last season, I believe they'll go 11-6, which is 2.5 games better than they did last season. So Arizona Cardinals. And finally, the last team, the San Francisco 49ers. Now, this is obviously assuming that they won't be injury plagued like they were last season. They had some pretty rough injuries, but this season I feel like, that's already a really good team, but they just had too many injuries. Now that they're 10-7, or now that they're healthy, I think they go 10-7, just simply because I'm not sure what their quarterback situation is going to look like. If we're going to see Trey Lance or if we're going to see Jimmy Garoppolo. But I think they go 10-7, just barely missing out on the playoffs. So that is pretty much going to do it for my predictions, I guess. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.